Who knows? Maybe it is just for this moment that you find yourself in a position of leadership. I'm Rabbi Liz Hirsch, and I'm your host. Inspired by the story of Esther, I will invite women in leadership to talk about women and leadership. As CEO of Women of Reform Judaism, the women's affiliate of the largest Jewish denomination in North America, I am committed to sharing powerful stories of women who stand out in their fields, who have stepped up just for this moment. Each week, I interview women who are influencing the world around them. My guest today is Mimi Kravetz. While you may listen to this episode at a later date or time, today is March 9th, 2026, and Israel, the U.S., and Iran are at war, with many other countries impacted and implicated in the conflict. We pray for the safety and well-being of everyone in harm's way. As we learn in the Talmud, Gadol HaShalom, great is peace, for even in times of war, we need peace. If you are looped in with a Jewish community, you may well have seen this phenomenon. If you are new to Jewish community, you are a part of it. Jewish engagement is growing, expanding, and thriving across North America. Since October 7th, 2023, Jewish Federations of North America has conducted research on the surge. This term describes an uptick in Jewish engagement across North America. Even in early data sets, we could see that nearly half of U.S. Jews reported deeper involvement in Jewish life compared to before October 7th. Follow-up surveying from spring 2025 found that while the initial surge had declined, with about 31% still reporting elevated engagement, that level remains well above pre-October 7th engagement patterns. Yet, the latest findings also revealed a concerning trend: the engagement of historically marginalized Jewish populations, including LGBTQ+ Jews, Jews of color, financially vulnerable Jews, and people with disabilities. This had declined more sharply than the community at large. We can and we must put intentional effort into fostering inclusion and belonging across our communal institutions. A parallel conversation taking place across the Jewish world is the gap between the generations regarding the use of the term Zionism. Jewish Federations has released additional research that may reshape this conversation. In a March 2025 survey, JFNA found that while overall 37% of respondents identified as Zionists, younger Jews in particular were far more likely to distance themselves from the term. These generational gaps is perhaps more about language and framing than a wholesale rejection of Israel. This is the conversation right now. Strong majorities across age groups continue to affirm Israel's right to exist and report emotional connection to the country. The data suggests that Jews are less comfortable with the term Zionist, often associating it with specific policies or ideologies, even when they support Jewish self-determination in principle. At a moment of real division in our community, this research invites us to come together across divides with curiosity and hope. My guest today, Mimi Kravetz, is Chief Impact and Growth Officer at JFNA and leads this important work.
I'm the Chief Impact and Growth Officer at Jewish Federations of North America. Federation, for those who don't know Jewish Federations of North America, JFNA supports a network of local community federations across North America, the U.S., and Canada who are building Jewish life in their local communities through a whole variety of areas of flourishing Jewish communities: education, care, engagement, crisis response, security, combating anti-Semitism. And we help communities learn from one another and give them tools and insights to be successful. And specifically, the team that I lead, Impact and Growth, uses research and information to help communities understand what's happening in their local community and nationally in Jewish life so that they can have good information and act on it.
Amazing. I grew up outside of the Boston area, so I'm from the CJP Federation catchment area. I used to live in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, had wonderful connections and relationships when I was a congregational rabbi with our federation there. And now I'm based in Cincinnati. So I've lived in a lot of different places, seen a lot of the different ways that the local federation model can work. And of course, now in my North American role, leading Women of Reform Judaism, work a lot with the federation folks through Conference of Presidents and on the North American level as well, too. So just really glad to have you here representing Federation. And also, we really wanted to chat and get into more about the amazing recent research and work that you've been doing as well, too. So we'll get into all of that. I would love it if you could start out, just tell us a little bit more about you and your journey and what brought you to sit in this role and your path along the way.
Well, I'm very much a product of the Jewish community and the Jewish community infrastructure that I now help support at Federation. I had a family connection to Judaism growing up, but it was really experiences at summer camp and then as a teen leader in BBYO and then as a young professional and college student engaged with Hillel that gave me my sense of identity and community and friendships as I was growing up. And importantly, that gave me a sense of myself as a leader and a Jewish leader. And so those experiences really filled my childhood and even my early career. My first job out of college, I worked at the Hillel at Stanford doing direct student engagement work, meeting with students, having coffee, and building Jewish life. And from there, I decided that I would go on and build a career in the business world. And a lot of my early business experiences learned from and built from the Jewish community. I went and got an MBA, and then I worked at American Express and Google. And a lot of the work I did there was at the intersection of understanding people and helping connect people with products and experiences that were meaningful and even magical for them. When I was at Google, we used to say we connected users to magic. And it was also in the business world that I developed skills in strategy and marketing and talent development. And importantly for the work I do today, using data and information to drive programs and outcomes. And it was when I was at Google leading our employment brand, so I was the head of marketing for HR, that I got a phone call asking me whether I would be interested in coming back to leadership in the Jewish world. And I often tell people it feels like the universe reached out and said, it's time to come home. And so I left that job at Google and returned to the Jewish community about a decade ago now, and have really enjoyed a journey in talent and operational and strategy roles in the Jewish world since.
We talk about it more in terms of becoming clergy, of entering the rabbinate or becoming a cantor, that someone feels called. But I'm hearing that language in what you described, that you took a path that you were rooted in Jewish community and Jewish experiences, and then gained, a lot of different skills and perspectives that I'm sure you apply in your work in Federation back to the Jewish community, and then to be called back into leadership here. That's amazing.
Yes, I really do feel that way. Like I'm honored to be in a position where I can use some of the skills that I developed in the corporate world, and I absolutely use them all the time, of course, adjusted for our Jewish community context. But to be here really serving the Jewish community feels like something so purposeful always, but especially in the moment that we're in.
Yeah, I think that I love looking at the business world and, sort of the best practices and the impacts that can be translated, into any kind of nonprofit, but particularly into the Jewish world. And I think that the more we take a look at some of those kind of practices while keeping our mission-focused, value-focused work at the front, then there's just, the sky's the limit on what you can achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. The role that I'm in now is a data role. I've always considered myself a people person, and a lot of the work that I do, and I actually came back to the community in a talent development or HR role, and that's some of what I was doing in the corporate world. What I think is important from the data and the corporate background is that it lets us see people and lets us see people at scale. Any individual working in the Jewish community or leading in the Jewish community, professional or lay, sees what's happening immediately around them in their congregation, in their family, in their organization. And so some of what I'm doing with these skills, looking at data and information, is helping people use data to see a bigger picture and understand trends, how what they're experiencing isn't only what they're experiencing, but what might be happening across the sector, so that they can respond to it and meet people's needs.
Yes, absolutely. I want to come back to all the data and those pieces because it's buzzing around for some folks, and some folks may not be as familiar with the recent studies and all those pieces. So I'm excited for you to get to share a little bit more about that. But I would love just to know, beyond your own path and some of the experiences you described, is there someone who, or maybe a few someones, one or two people you want to reflect on, think about, who were a role model for you, or someone who was kind of one of those signpost people who pointed the way when you were moving through your path and your journey to be in your role? I always love to hear about that from folks.
The person who always pops to mind the most is my mother, who is also one of my best friends, who I lost a couple of years ago. And my mother was a person who cared deeply about people and family and relationship. And my mother was in the field of speech therapy. But what she really did when she was in that field was be able to see people, and whether they were children or adults, to really understand them and understand their needs and guide her therapeutic practice according to their needs. And she was able to do it with members of our family, with people of all ages. And so that connection to understanding people and wanting to be there to serve people's needs, one of the people who really brings that forward for me is my own mother, and was a really important role model and friend and guide in my life.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing about her with us. And I know her memory is a blessing through the impact that she still has on you. I would love to talk about the surge. That's one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the podcast. And for some folks, they hear the surge, they've been in these conversations, they know what's going on, they've been reading all the articles, taking a look at the data. And for some folks, hearing what you're working on may be newer to them, but may and could, I think, definitely have a lot of impact on the way that they're volunteering or working in their local Jewish communities. So would love for you to kind of set the context, set the scene, what motivated setting out on this, to collect this research and this data. And let's talk about things that we're seeing from it as you continue to digest the data.
Sure. So when we talk about the surge, we are talking about the fact that since October 7th, what we see in the Jewish community in North America is that people are connecting and showing up more than they did before. And we see that across all different age cohorts and a whole diversity of different kinds of people, whether they were deeply engaged in Jewish life before or whether they didn't do anything at all in Jewish life before. And this is true despite this moment of rising anti-Semitism, concerns that people have had in the Jewish community about fear of disengagement or safety. Truly, people want to be part of the Jewish community right now. The reason that we started researching this is actually that we heard from local Federation and Jewish communal professionals after October 7th that they had literally taken out more chairs for the various commemorations that happened after October 7th. And then they told us that they never had to put those chairs away, that it wasn't only for those moments of sorrow and ceremony that people were showing up, but they were also showing up for educational courses. And they were also showing up for social events. They just wanted to be around Jewish community more. And so in March of 2024, we conducted a national study, and we tried to understand this phenomenon in Jewish life better. What was going on? Who was showing up, and what were they looking for? And what we saw is that people were showing up as a result of what had happened in the world, but not only to hear about it. It wasn't only to learn about what was happening in Israel or to learn about this rising moment of anti-Semitism. They were showing up because with all that happening, what they wanted was connection and community and purpose. They wanted Jewish friendships, and the ways that they were showing up, some of what was happening was what we were hearing about, right? The chairs in the synagogue or the JCC, but a lot of how that we found out they were showing up is that they were spending more time with Jewish friends, or that they were having more Jewish conversations with friends who they knew that they were Jewish, but it was never an important part of their connection or friendship. And now it moved into the center. And we heard about WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups that people were starting because they were looking for the other Jews in their neighborhood or who shared their context. And it's been really inspiring. As an industry of Jewish communal service, we've always wondered, how do we get people to show up more, especially those who are on the periphery of Jewish life? Not for the most beautiful of reasons, but here we are in this really hard time, and people are coming to us and saying, I need something and I want something now. And so it's inspiring to think about how we can meet that moment. And I'll also share, because I'm sure many of your listeners are also themselves already were deeply engaged in Jewish life. And we also see that people who were in the core of the Jewish community already are also showing up and doing more, that they're stepping up from where they were to get engaged in more ways, to ask proactively for roles in leadership, to do advocacy, to lead local advocacy. They've shown up in philanthropy, and we saw that in incredible ways in giving to Israel and Jewish institutions. So the surge has really inspired me during this time, during a very hard moment. And I've also been very motivated to see the ways in which the community is addressing it, not only by doing all the things that we were already doing and needing to welcome even more people into those spaces, but really creatively thinking about how else we might engage people in Jewish life who weren't here in the same way before October 7th.
Amazing. And I think that capturing this data set, and I want to ask you definitely a little bit more about, some of the hard numbers, any of the data pieces that really stand out to you as headlines or highlights. But for me, putting on sort of the Jewish text values lens for it, whenever I hear folks talking about the surge, I think about the way that moment at Mount Sinai when we received the Ten Commandments is described, right? That we say that everybody who ever was, is, or would be counted among the Jewish people was there. And I feel like this moment that you're capturing in the data, but I know that folks, whether from North American organizations all the way down to their local communities, they're just seeing it and feeling it and experiencing it, an uptick in participation and engagement and deepening. But I'm like, oh, we've caught up with more of those folks who were standing with us at Sinai, right? Like it feels like a little bit more deep and rich, and we're connecting in with those folks and becoming more tight-knit and more engaged, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think that's right, that on October 7th, it was a moment where every single one of us who identifies Jewishly and members of our greater Jewish community, by the way, both people who are Jewish and people who are partnered with Jews, felt something in that moment, felt horrified, felt sad and traumatized, and also felt deeply Jewish, like we were all in this together. And so we see people, as a result, trying to understand that Jewish part, being interested in studying Israel and studying Torah and coming together with Jews and hosting and showing up at Shabbat dinners and seeking others in a different way than they did before. And it's really powerful.
A lot of the impetus for taking a look, as you've described it, and as folks know, October 7th being a huge seismic event for the Jewish community, for the Jewish people, for Israel, that, we will mark that as a point of change and transition and, of course, pain and hardship for decades to come. And I'm curious, what of the trends and what have you been able to uncover in the data, even sort of having that as your start point, were emerging beforehand? Or do you think that this is really something that's more sparked by this moment and the event, causality and the correlation in those pieces?
In our data, we actually don't know directly cause, but we can see correlation. And we know some things that were happening in the world then. So we know that overall, the trend was actually declining engagement. It has been slowly declining and tracked over time by multiple studies. And we know that there was a moment of really pulling back during COVID when people were isolated and loneliness was on the rise. And it absolutely was the case post-COVID that we were already seeing people look for connection and a way to come out of that loneliness, and that the Jewish community had and really has always had technologies for bringing people out of loneliness and bringing people into communities. So there probably was already some uptick. But when we asked the question of people, in these surveys, we said, we asked them about how engaged they were prior to October 7th, and then about their increase in engagement since October 7th. And since you asked about some of the numbers, when we conducted this study in March of 2024, what we saw is that 43% of the Jewish community, so somewhere near half of the Jewish community, was engaging more or reported engaging more than they did before October 7th. And you should know that that wasn't just about feeling or pride. We actually asked them, have you been doing more? And that doing could have been in a Jewish institution. And there are many who showed up at their JCC, or who showed up more at their synagogue, or who volunteered in other ways in Jewish communal organizations. We know from our partners that people were volunteering more, that they were showing up with local engagement organizations more. And we also saw people showing up more with other parents to advocate in public schools, at city council meetings, and in social ways and communal ways, often locally in the Jewish community. So the surge has been really powerful, and it does seem like it was very much pivoting on that moment of October 7th, not only what happened in Israel, but also the rising anti-Semitism that we've all seen and experienced in North America as part of that pull to come together. And it wasn't a given, right? There are other moments in history of anti-Semitism where people might have pulled back from community. And instead, what we've really seen in this moment is coming in towards community.
Right. There might be the story or the narrative that folks are afraid or are fed up and want to disengage. And I think a lot of what you're seeing in the data, in the big picture analysis and the trends, and that many of us are experiencing in either in our own lives, in the communities that we work in and serve in and volunteer in, that's counter to that case in terms of sort of the story around anti-Semitism. I would love to ask you more about the conversation about Zionism, because I think, knowing as it is that this data is so rooted to October 7th, and there have been so many conversations about what does Zionism look like, how, or particularly as we go forward in future generations, those who are coming into their own in leadership in Jewish communities, what is that going to look like? And how does that relate to the data that you've been collecting and sharing and studying?
Yeah, so the information that we've been sharing recently on Zionism is exactly connected to this study on Jewish life. And we started trying to understand connection to Israel and connection to Zionism because it is a key part of Jewish engagement today. And first and foremost, what I want to make sure we realize is that connection to Israel among U.S. Jews that we studied is way up right now. And we know that because we asked the same questions as they asked in 2020 in the Pew study. And what we see is the percentage of Jews who say that they are emotionally connected to Israel is way up. And what we also see is that most Jews deeply believe in the whole idea of Israel. 9 out of 10 Jews say that they believe in the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, that they believe in the ideal of Israel. And so we know that Israel is actually something that we share today. And we saw that in the way that we came together after October 7th and the way that Jews stood together in support of Israel and Israelis, right? Like a lot of the work that we do at Federation, we raise and allocate dollars on behalf of the Jewish community to the people of Israel and to a whole variety of emergency needs and social service needs and medical and mental health needs. And the Jewish community really showed up for that. So connection and engagement with Israel and belief in Israel is really high. What we also saw in the data, and we recently coined the term the Zionism gap, to talk about the fact that while 9 out of 10 Jews say that they believe in Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, only 37% today, unaided, would say I'm a Zionist. And when we first saw this data, we were surprised and deeply curious about what it meant. And so we actually, had seen it in the 2024 study, and it almost felt like something must be wrong or missing. And so we asked a follow-up question about what people believe Zionism is. And what becomes very clear is that the term Zionism has become attached to a whole variety of broader political meanings and concerns that aren't part of what most people who are close into the Jewish community and who identify as Zionist would connect to as part of their Zionism, right? And so the reason that actually the largest group of people that we ask say, yes, absolutely, I care about Israel, I stand by Israel and Israelis, but that term doesn't resonate with how I identify, is because they believe in order to be a Zionist, they would need to identify with political actions, actions of Israel, that they may stand very much against. And of course, in the US, we know that we can be proud citizens of the United States, but deeply critical of our government or its actions. But around the term Zionism, there's come to be all of this other meaning. So it feels like it's a moment to realize, and what the Zionism data is telling us is that connection to Israel is way up right now. And the role I'd love to see the Jewish community play is making it clear that you can be connected to Israel, care about Israel, act on behalf of Israel, and still question and feel a lot of complexity around issues of Israeli government, Israeli action, just as we would with our own country and our own government.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be as specific and as clear-eyed as you just were in describing, what you're seeing in the data and the way that people are relating to the specific terms of Zionism or Zionist. And I think I've been reflecting as someone who is very comfortable with the word Zionist and Zionism and all the rest. But, knowing that I and, a small subset of folks, perhaps for whom that word is not as challenging or fraught, have spent a lot of time studying the history and living in Israel and have the highest level of engagement. So I think it might also be interesting at some point, unless you've sort of studied in this way, like what are the engagement or professional backgrounds or, even, past time spent living or spending time in Israel correlated, with those folks who are still able to connect with the term. I think that would be so fascinating. And the other thing that I was thinking about is, as a leader of the reform movement's women's organization, the feminist arm, that a little bit of that sort of like, I'm not a feminist. Like I can't be those kind of things. That's so radical. That's so whatever, and to sort of have the word not map on correctly to the way that people are showing up with their beliefs, with their values and all the rest. That's just been really striking me lately, as well as shying away from the term because you don't buy into the fullness of what you think that means to be a part of something that is connected with a particular word.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we do know a bit about, who is in each of these groups, and those who are closest in and would identify as very engaged are, there's a tight correlation with those people and the ones who are comfortable calling themselves Zionists, because I think we do a good job inside the thick Jewish community of educating about what this means. But for people who aren't as close in, they have absorbed messages from all different places that Zionism might mean something else that they're not comfortable with. And they don't know if they can show up in Jewish community with all of those complexity and questions. And we actually saw some other really interesting data that a lot of people, they believe that they wouldn't be welcome in the Jewish community with their views. And that is true of people both on the left and on the right. It's not only on one side, and it's a relatively big percentage. So, whenever I show this to Jewish communal leaders and I show them that, 37% of people think the Jewish community is too hardline in support of Israel, and 34% think we're not strong and outspoken enough in support of Israel, right? It's really hard to win as a leader. But what we do know is that people want to be part of it. And for people who aren't on the close inside, they don't understand that they can show up with their love of Israel and their support for Israelis, and also all of their questions about what's happening and their concerns. And so, for me, because what I want to see us doing is building thriving Jewish communities, that feels like the most important takeaway from the data. You're right, terms like Zionism, just like the term feminism, both of which I'm also very comfortable calling myself, but they can become toxic over time. And so there's an active debate that's come out of this research around leaning into the term or leaning out. What's most important to me is just making sure people understand when we use language what we mean. and the broader sense of who's really welcome inside Jewish community.
Yes, and I think that the loudest voices are always the ones on the poles or the extremes, and you've really drawn a box in some ways around the folks who may be struggling to either, feel comfortable with the term Zionism or to say, I'm going to accept exactly what I think that means and not have any questions or lack of surety or just want to be engaged in dialogue. But the folks, the 9 out of 10 who feel connected with Israel, I feel like that is such an amazing population if we're slicing out subsections of folks within the surge to think about who and how we are serving them, right? To know that when they walk into congregations, into communities, into different spaces and settings, that it's a place where it's open and there can be dialogue and there can be conversation. And what do we need to do to serve these people? I'm thinking a lot right now about how to get a lot more of the women who are broadly connect themselves in with the reform movement and beyond to Israel so that they can have their own experiences, so that it's not something that's far away on the news and it's not something where they have to be asked to speak on something that they don't have personal or direct experience with, but to really make it something that they've seen and engaged with in their own way through their own eyes so that they don't have to be in the kind of I don't know category or that's not working for me because I just don't feel as connected.
Yeah, it's really important. So a few other things that you said that really resonate with what we've seen are that people who have their own experience in Israel, whether they've traveled to Israel or live in Israel, are much more clear about what Zionism means and what they believe and likely to feel welcome showing up in the Jewish community. And so that Israel trip experience that we've leaned on for so long is still important, especially now. But we do know that traveling to Israel and having that personal experience with Israel is essential and makes a huge difference to people understanding Zionism and being able to articulate their own relationship and connection to Israel in all of its facets. So I think the more that we can get people back to Israel, the better. One of the interesting things that we saw in the data about age group, because people often ask about that, is actually the age group with the most Zionists is also the age group with the most people who traveled to Israel, a group of people for whom Birthright Israel offered them free trips. So it's, I think, roughly like 34 to 45-year-olds or something like that. They're the largest percentage of people in this age cohort have traveled to Israel, and the largest percentage also identify with Zionism and understand what it is, and that they can show up with their love of Israel and their complex ideas. So that trip really does seem to make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I'm curious, is there anything else sort of outside of this very present set of data and studies and research and the way that folks have been analyzing it that you're thinking about, other trends, other pieces of your work that you want to make sure to highlight and share with us?
Well, one of the things we were talking about before is this moment of anti-Semitism. And we spoke about the surge, and we actually do see that people who experience anti-Semitism are surging even more. But I wanted to say a few things about where we're at with people's feelings about anti-Semitism and security. As you might imagine, there's deep concern in the Jewish community about anti-Semitism in the non-Jewish community. And there's deep concern about safety and security. And it makes sense given what's happened in the world. What's interesting is that we see that people who have those concerns are showing up more, not less, in the Jewish community. And people who show up the most are likely to already understand that the Jewish community is doing a lot to keep them safe and secure, and that we're doing a lot to combat anti-Semitism. But sort of like we saw with the Israel data, those who are not in the thick inside sometimes don't know as much about what we're doing to combat anti-Semitism actively or what we're doing to provide security. And Jewish institutions are spending so much on security right now, but people don't always know what we're doing. And so one thing I just think is important to keep in mind is not only do we want to do all of the important work that we're doing, but we need to communicate to people what's happening. Because when people understand what we're doing and they want to show up, they're even more comfortable showing up in Jewish community and knowing that the Jewish community is really space and a secure space for them. And that these are issues that we're working on and care deeply about alongside all of them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure that we get to talk about Purim, because not only is Purim season upon us, we'll probably share this just after Purim, this conversation, but, thinking that we're in Purim season, and on this podcast, we actually celebrate Purim all year round, because the theme for our podcast is inspired by the moment where Esther is concealing her Jewish identity, right? Start to lay on those layers of, was she part of the surge or not, right? But she was doing it for her safety, because that's what she and Mordecai thought was best at that moment. And then when suddenly all of the Jewish people's lives were at risk, she alone was the person who could step up and be the right person, the right woman to lead at the right time. And I love just to ask my guests to think about how you connect with Esther's leadership, Esther's story. She is such a model for us in so many ways. And think about, is there a moment like that for you that stands out? Or is there a way in which you connect into Esther's leadership, her story, and this Purim season?
Right. Well, as you were starting to say, the surge in leadership very much speaks to that Esther moment, right? I think there's a lot of people in the Jewish community right now who found themselves in a place after October 7th, whatever it was, right? A parent in a school, somebody who was in a corporation where something was happening that they wanted to respond to in this moment of anti-Semitism. All of a sudden, they were in this position in a time where so much was happening for the community. And I have been really inspired watching a lot of individual volunteers and leaders step up in that moment and say, I'm going to do something. I'm going to bring a group together. I'm going to bring an employee resource group together, or a group of parents together. And I'm going to step up and do something in this moment, not because I was trained to do it, but because I'm here. And I have a set of tools or relationships, and I'm going to use them. And I know for myself, I wasn't always working in the Jewish community. And I came back from the corporate world to work in the Jewish world now a whole decade ago, not just in this moment. But I do feel a sense of responsibility and gratitude that in this moment for the Jewish people, that I can be in a place where I'm positioned to have the skills and the amazing team and to be part of an organization to offer something to individuals and leaders across Jewish life in a really important moment where so much change is happening. And it feels like an honor to be in service of the Jewish community and setting the table with information for people to have really important conversations right now.
I'm your host, Rabbi Liz Hirsch, CEO of Women of Reform Judaism, and you've been listening to Just for This. Check us out on most social media platforms at Just for This Podcast. You can also follow Women of Reform Judaism at WRJ1913. Our show is produced by Shear and Shim LLC. Special thanks to Ali Rubin, Izzy Wellman, the whole WRJ team, Rabbi Neil Hirsch, Lior, and Micah. Jen King designed our logo, and Eric Shimalonis wrote our theme music. Thanks for listening. We'll have more Just for This moments next time.